Okay, guys, we are looking at a quadratic equation. 2x squared plus 30x equals negative 112. The first thing that I want you guys to remember is that you always want to set your equation equal to 0 if you're trying to factor this quadratic equation, which is what we're practicing right now. So let's go ahead and set our equation equal to 0 by adding 112 to both sides of our equation. And that ends up giving us 2x squared plus 30x plus 112, which will equal 0. Our next step is always going to be look for a greatest common factor. And I noticed that all of those coefficients and that constant we have are even, so we can factor out a 2 from each of those terms. So we're left with x squared plus 15x. And then 112 divided by 2 gives us a positive 56. And we're just going to bring down the equals 0. So we are going to try and figure out what two terms, our a value and our c value, what they multiply together to make. And then we're going to break it apart into positive 15. So what I showed you guys in class was we're going to bring down our 2 and our brackets, of course, but change that trinomial. We're going to say, okay, we have x squared, and then our 15x is going to turn into two separate terms. We're going to split it apart somehow, and then our plus 56. So x squared blankety blank plus 56 equals 0. So let's create our table. We need a times c, and we want those factors to add to make b. So what are the factors, or excuse me, what is a times c? 1 times 56 gives us 56, and our b value is a positive 15. So what are the factors of 56 that we can think of off the top of our head? Well, the easiest one's always going to be 1 times 56, or we could multiply negative 1 times negative 56. And we also have positive 7 times positive 8, or negative 7 times negative 8. Let's see if any of those work before we come up with any other factors. So when I look at each pair of factors, what do they add to make? 1 plus 56 gives us 57, not what we wanted. Negative 56 minus 1 gives us negative 57. 7 plus 8 gives us 15, and negative 7 plus negative 8 gives us negative 15. So which one did we want? We wanted it to equal this positive 15 right here, see? So we're going to use the pair 7 and 8, positive 7 and positive 8. So this 15x, this b term right here in the middle, we are going to separate that into a positive 7x plus 8x. If we were to combine those together, we get a 15x. So our equation is still exactly the same thing. We're just breaking it apart into separate pieces. Now from this point, we're going to group together our first two terms and our last two terms and see what we can factor out of them. So x squared plus 7x. What can we factor out of those? Well, they both have an x term. So we'll factor out an x, and we're left with x squared divided by x gives us just an x, and 7x divided by x gives us a plus 7. And our next term, or our next binomial, is 8x plus 56. We can factor out a positive 8, and we're left with x plus 7. Go ahead and bring down your 2 every time. Bring down your brackets, and your equals 0. So we're just breaking apart what's inside our brackets right now. All right, from there, I noticed that x is being multiplied by x plus 7, and 8 is being multiplied by x plus 7. So I can recreate two binomials. I can say x plus 8 and put them in their own set of parentheses. They're both being multiplied by x plus 7. By rewriting it this way, by putting the x plus 8 in their own set of parentheses, I don't have to write my x plus 7 twice. And of course, we still want to bring down our 2. And all of that is supposed to equal 0. Now, when you multiply three terms together, which is what we have right here, we have 1, 2, 3 terms. When you multiply any set of terms together and your answer is 0, that means one of those terms has to equal 0. It's impossible for 2 to equal 0, so I'm going to throw that one out, but x plus 8 can equal 0, and x plus 7 can equal 0. So how do I solve for x in both of those instances? Well, first one, we're going to subtract 8 from both sides of our equation, and that gives us x equals negative 8. And then our second equation, we're going to subtract 7 from both sides of our equation, and we end up with x equals negative 7. So those right there are your solutions, negative 7 and negative 8. Let's do one more example. Let's do example 4 right here. 8x squared minus 6x minus 9 equals 0. Well, step 1, set our equation equal to 0 if we're factoring, and then I'm going to look for a GCF. There's no greatest common factor in the numbers 8, negative 6, and negative 9, and they don't all have the same variable either. So that's taken care of. So we're going to go ahead and rewrite our equation as 8x squared blankety blank minus 9. All of that is going to equal 0. Remember, we're taking this b term right here, this negative 6, and we're going to break it into two separate pieces. But what pieces are we going to use? Well, we need to multiply together. We're going to make our table. We're going to multiply our a value times our c value. And we want them to add to make our b value. And our b value, if we look back up at the top, was a negative 6. So a times c gave us negative 72, and our b value was negative 6, right? Yes. So let's come up with our factors of negative 72. All right, we can have negative 8 times positive 9, or I said that backwards, didn't I? Negative 9 times 8, or positive 9 times negative 8. We also have, if you remember your 12 factors, we have positive 6 times negative 12, or we can use negative 6 times positive 12. Let's see if any of those work. Negative 9 plus 8 will give us negative 1, not what we wanted. 9 plus negative 8 gives us positive 1, not what we wanted. 6 minus 12, that gives us negative 6. That is the b value that we wanted right here. So I can stop looking, and I know that I'm going to be using a positive 6 and a negative 12. So I come back up here, and I know I am going to be using a plus 6x and a minus 12x. All right, so we broke apart our b value into the appropriate terms. We're just going to group these together. So in the first set of parentheses, 8x squared plus 6x, 8 and 6 are both divisible by 2, and x squared and x are both divisible by x. So when I take 8x squared and I divide out or factor out a 2x, we're left with 4x. And if we have a plus 6x and we divide out a 2x, we're left with plus 3. And then our second set of parentheses, negative 12x minus 9. We can factor out a 3 from both of those, but I want you to notice both of those terms are negative. So I can actually factor out a minus 3 or a negative 3 right here. And what that does, negative 12x divided by negative 3 gives us a positive 4x. And then negative 9 divided by negative 3 gives us our minus 3. And of course, bring down our equals 0. Now that's important that you recognize what sign to factor out, because I need my x squared, or excuse me, 4x plus 3, whatever is in that first set of parentheses, to match exactly this right here. Oops, I forgot to make that a plus. I'm sorry. Negative 9 divided by negative 3 is a positive 3. So inside the parentheses, they need to match exactly. If there's even one sign that doesn't match up, the factoring doesn't work. Fortunately, ours match up. So we know both 2x, let me use black, both 2x and our minus 3 are both being multiplied by 4x plus 3. And of course, they're going to equal 0. So we've got two factors right here. This is our first factor and this is our second factor. They are both being multiplied together to make 0. So that means either 2x minus 3 is going to equal 0 or 4x plus 3 is going to equal 0. So how do we solve that? Well, to get our first x value alone, we add 3 to both sides of our equation. And that gives us 2x equals 3. Divide both sides by 2, and that gives us x equals 3/2. There's no need to change it to a decimal unless you just want to, or if your answer choice is in decimal form. The second equation, minus 3 from both sides, and we end up with 4x equals -3. Divide both sides of our equation by 4, and we get x equals -3/4. So those are our two solutions. Those are our two solutions. And that's how you factor a quadratic equation and solve.